Welcome back to the Cyclist Magazine Podcast. I am your host, James Spender, and with me down the end of a pipe stuffed with lots of wires and potentially some flexible glass, because I think that's how an ISDN line works, and I think that's actually what the internet still uses, basically fibre optics, is Will Strickson, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the stage, Will. Will, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Right now, the Olympics is on. I mean, we're not watching it because I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, but have you been watching it?
Of course I have. More than I guess probably we should be, considering it should be working.
Oh, yeah, I know, but it's on in the background. You've got two eyes, one for the keyboard, one for the monitor.
Yeah. And then the other monitor, and then the other monitor, and then the screen with the Olympics on.
It's true. Will's setup at home makes him look like a kind of 1980s trader. And he's got a huge ticker tape machine at the front, just running through all of the different point scores on exchanges. That's something else
I've got a phone down here.
America having its worst day in the last couple of years on whatever, was it NASDAQ? I don't know, something about that. Yeah. Anyway, more doom and gloom. We're all doomed. But the Olympics isn't doomed. It's been really fun. I found it very immersive. What's stuck out to you there, Will?
I just think it's been pretty good. It's nice to have it on the right time zone. I say right,
that's true.
Factually.
Yes. One of the nice things is that I believe that Paris didn't build anything for it. They just reused old stadiums because they wanted to have a lower carbon footprint for this Olympics, but also probably made it a bit cheaper.
They put the swimming pool in the stadium used for rugby. That's cool.
Oh, did they? Okay, so they repurposed stuff. I like that. I love a bit of upcycling.
Although that did mean that the pool was a bit shallower than a lot of them.
Not
so
fast,
the world records weren't going, which is a shame. Because, the French would have loved Marchand to have had world records as well as the golds.
They would have done. And that was what the Chinese did so brilliantly at Beijing, was they made a pool that was apparently 900 feet deep, which is the fastest pool possible, because it means that you can just push the water down and it doesn't rebound back off the bottom and into your path, thus slowing you down. You may or may not know the answer to this, Will, and if you don't, we can cut it out. But team sprint, is this the first time it's been at the Olympics as a new format, or is it the third time? Because I'm pretty sure I heard conflicting reports from both Claire Balding and then latterly Sir Chris Hoy.
Yeah, I think this is the first one, because I think that's why they broke the world record about 5 times over the whole thing. It's done now, because there weren't that many records to break in that format. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing I did think when I watched that, I looked at the bikes, which is basically going to lead into today's episode very nicely, by the way, because we're talking to the man who designed or helped design the Hope Lotus HB1, I'm going to say, whatever, HB something, bike that Team GB are riding, and also various components on lots of other national teams' bicycles. But the difference between the detail of track cyclists, so they're doing, how many laps? Are they doing 4 laps? They do a kind of first lap, then they split off and do 3 more in the team sprint?
I believe so, yeah. I think they do the opening one and then they...
So,
I could be very wrong.
Anyway, they basically get on the track for like 30 plus seconds, which is a very short amount of time. But still, they optimize absolutely every single thing on themselves, on their bodies, on the bike to be fast. And then if you look at the men's 100-meter final, all those dudes have got so much stuff going on in terms of like Noah Lyle's jewelry alone. I know the guy won, okay, so I'm not saying that he's obviously, he can do what he wants, but he was wearing a pretty hench necklace for one thing. And then a couple of the other runners have got like fairly flailing hair. It's not like they're all, I'm just like, why are you not just wearing absolute skin suits? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, obviously people are just going to go, oh, well, it doesn't matter because it's such short distance. But it does, because if you're going, so they're running at 42 kilometers an hour or something. And as I've always been told at bike school, as soon as you go over 20 kilometers an hour, then about 80% of your resistance is drag. So you're overcoming air resistance much more than anything else. And so they're doing that. They're well into that territory. Yes, okay, they're doing it over 9.79 seconds, 78 seconds, whatever the winning time was. But yeah, you're right. It's separated at the end by 5/1000th of a second. Surely just not having a flappy jersey and a heavy chain and some slightly cool hair that flares out from behind you, surely it's got to be faster. Why
They should all be wearing swimming caps.
They should all be completely devoid of hair, and their skin suits should be literally painted on, almost literally painted on, and that would make them exceptionally fast. I just don't understand. And even, it's even crazier in the women's side of things. Everyone's got really long hair, which, we all know about Fignon. He had really long hair. He lost Tour de France. So all of these questions and more, we will level at our guest today, Mr. Dimitris Katsanis. At the moment, Dimitris heads up Metron A.E, which stands for Additive Engineering, which is basically, I say basically because it's very advanced, 3D printing in metal. So Metron make a variety of components for hospitals, for aerospace, but also for sport. He's got his own brand called Mythos, which we even featured a Mythos stem in Cyclist at one point, because Cyclist is a magazine and you can subscribe at cyclist.co.uk. But he was instrumental, along with people like Chris Boardman, in setting up what was referred to as the Secret Squirrel Club in the mid-90s, which was the kind of brains behind the Marginal Gains program. In essence, it was all about fine-tuning performance, fine-tuning kit, which is where Dimitris came in, particularly in terms of composite engineering and in terms of aerodynamics, to eke out those tiny, tiny gains, the sort of ones we were just talking about, in order to win medals. And that's exactly what happened. And he was fantastically successful, but he continues to be fantastically successful. I think at the last count, he's won, or he's been a part of winning, I should say, over 100 gold Olympic and world medals in cycling, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I think he's been on the podium for, you reckon, like at least the last 3 or 4 Olympics, possibly even more. And yeah, right now he's got at least 4 teams signed up to be using some of his equipment. And he's also had a hand, as I said earlier, in designing the Hope bike that Team GB are racing on. So he's an incredibly interesting guy. We've already prattled on for too long. This is quite a long interview, but I do suggest sticking with it because he's a genius, basically. He's a bicycle genius, and he's pretty damn funny as well. I really enjoyed chatting to him, and I know Will did too. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dimitris Katsanis. Well, I think it's fair to say, Dimitris, and I mean this with the absolute most respect, that lots of people in cycling won't know who you are, but they have seen so many things you've made, because you're the guy. You are Britain's kind of technological spearhead for at least the last decade in terms of the big successes we've seen at the Olympics and at world track events and hour records. But you've been doing this stuff since the early 90s. Could you give me a very potted, quick summary CV? If you're on LinkedIn and you were going for a job and I'm there in a quick chat, what are you going to tell me about yourself?
So bike related, I had my first bikes racing in the Olympics in 92 in Barcelona. And at the time it was more or less ordinary steel triangular frames with a bit of carbon in the corners. So that was racing with the Greek national team. Then after that, I decided to go on and study composites engineering because I thought carbon fiber is the future. So then as a student project, of course, what do? You make a carbon fiber frame. Of course, it's the most natural thing. So I went on and I made a carbon fiber frame, these monocoque type of frames that we had in the early 90s, which was a great time for innovation. And then in the 96 Olympics, I had quite a few national teams racing with those in World Championships and in the Olympics, like the Greeks, an Italian rider, some Russian, some Latvians, Estonians, an American guy. I can't remember how many. There were like 10 or 11 national teams that were racing with these carbon frames. And then the UCI went on to ban those monocoque frames. So I went on, and I think in 2000 I had, again, only the Greek national team racing with a couple of frames that I made for them. They were the ordinary triangular frame, carbon fiber again. And then there was a significant change at the end of 2001. Actually, British Cycling approached me with regards to make some frames for the 2004 Olympics. And in fact, I had the first few frames ready in 2002. And some riders, including Chris Hoy, he rode this first set of frames in 2002. And then my collaboration with British Cycling, it goes on ever since. So I was part of the small team of people. Some people, they may have heard of the Secret Squirrel Club, which was something that Chris Boardman, I think, came up with. And that we did all the developments that you heard about for 2008 and 2012 Olympics. After that, after 2012, the structure changed a bit, and Tony Parnell came in and he was following a different structure. But I kept working with British Cycling, maybe not to the extent as before, but they keep coming back Olympics after Olympics after Olympics. So in effect, in 2016, I had a smaller influence, but then the Tokyo Olympics, there were, again, more components that we designed. And we also have a collaboration that we did with British Cycling for the current Olympics.
So, I mean, I'm pretty sure you've seen James Bond. All our listeners have seen James Bond. So you're basically Q, and what you're doing is kind of Q branch for British Cycling.
Sort of, yeah, you may say so. And somehow over the years, I tried my hand in pretty much everything from carbon fiber to aerodynamics to skin suits to helmets to cranks, handlebars, forks, wheels. These last 8 years, very heavily into 3D printing with metal. I always try to look into the future and see what is the next one coming up that it can potentially give you an advantage. And it was actually around 2015. Probably you are familiar that 2014 and part of 2015, I was working for the UCI, doing for the rules and regulations of the sport. And early 2015, I decided I want to leave that position at the UCI to pursue my dream, if you want to call it, of 3D printing in metal. And actually the first one that I did, it was the handlebar for Bradley Wiggins for his hour record. And in effect, what happened at the time is we ran out of time because we actually designed and manufactured pretty much the entire bike. I think the only things that we didn't design and manufacture was the chain, the saddle, and the pedals. Pretty much everything else was made in one way or another. And we almost ran out of time and we had no handlebar. And for a number of years, I was trying to find like a headline project to inject this metal 3D printing, do something with it. And I said, look, guys, unless if we 3D print it, we're not going to be able to have a handlebar on the starting line. And nobody could see it at the time, but nobody could see why this will be an advantage. And we did it. It was successful. And then since then, you have all these 3D printed parts that we hear more and more and more. So I am happy that I was on the very beginning of this time. And we have more things coming up, let's call it this way.
So take me back to Barcelona Olympics 1992. As you said, you're with the Greek team and you've got steel frames and they've got some carbon fairings, some things, some aspects to make them potentially a bit more rigid, more aerodynamic. I'm assuming at that point you see Chris Boardman on his Mike Burrows Lotus.
Yes.
Do you talk to Chris Boardman about the Lotus? And what do you think when you see this bike? Because that's a bike that looked like nothing else, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say Mike Burrows, he was definitely one of the visionaries of the sport, that he could see different ways of doing the same old thing, but in a better way. So his contribution on actually revolutionizing the sport, it was definitely a major one. So he came up with the original idea. Then the Lotus engineers, they took it and they developed it further onto a winning machine. Before that, I believe that Mike Barros, he actually had 1 or 2 bikes that he made for himself that he was racing. And Lotus, they took it on and they made it the well-known Lotus bike that Boardman rode to victory. Of course, we should not subtract from the athletic performance of Chris Boardman, because if I was riding it, I don't think I would be winning the Olympics. But the bike was definitely revolutionary at the time and opened up very much like a new way of doing things, to the extent, as we know, that a few years later, the UCI had to change the regulations to restrict that. And that's why, to a significant extent, we are back to the, may call it, ordinary triangular frames. So, 92 was very much like a key year. The Lotus bike came on, or Mike Barros' Lotus bike came on. And it was also my first time that I had bikes in the Olympics.
So did you and Chris talk? Because you mentioned that as time wore on, a big thing that you ended up becoming involved with was the Secret Squirrel Club. So
yes,
actually, maybe that's a good point to ask as well. Is could you elaborate on the nature of the Secret Squirrel Club? What was that doing, and how was it formed?
First time I got involved on something like this, it was, I remember my first meeting that I had with British Cycling in the very end of 2001. It was the British Cycling guys, and there was a guy called Scott Draw that he was working at the time for UK Sport, that he was sitting somewhere in the corner and he didn't say much. I remember he introduced himself to me. Chris Boardman, if I'm not mistaken, he was not involved on that, these first 1 or 2 initial meetings. His role was primarily to coordinate everything and make sure that things they going in more or less the right direction, because you needed somebody who has an overall vision and a good eye for the technology. Although he may not be classically trained as an engineer, he had a very good eye of saying, yeah, I think this will work and I don't think this will work. Scott and Chris, they were very much like the people that they were employing the rest of us, because it wasn't only myself, it was myself and 2 or 3 different guys in aerodynamics, from simulation to wind tunnel testing, a rider that was riding the bikes most of the time, and a lady that she was doing the skin suits, and there were a few other people that came in and out. And the structure, it was very much like, we want the best possible people in the project, that they can come up with the ideas and, most importantly, make them real. Because anybody can have great ideas, but if you don't know how to bring them to reality, it just doesn't really matter. And we left almost no stone unturned. In fact, a lot of the things that you see today, we tried them back in the time, and sometimes we abandoned them because maybe we didn't test them well enough, or maybe the practicalities of the time. You know, all of these very pointy helmets that you see today? We actually tried something like this. I can't remember exactly when it was. Maybe it was 2010 or something like this. It was on a very pointy helmet like this. And it was this interesting episode that Chris Hoy puts it on his head, because we meant to try it on a number of different riders. So Chris Hoy puts it on his head, and he takes it off. He said, I'll take silver. I'm not wearing that one. I'm all right with silver.
So what was your brief then as the unofficial Secret Squirrel Club? Was it purely aerodynamics, or was it literally improve everything?
In fact, my initial brief, it was I went over there with the knowledge of designing the frames. That's what it was. And then one of my initial projects, it was to actually design the jig that holds the bike that sits on the wind tunnel, on the balance that measures the forces. So I designed that. Then at some point, I had some ideas on aerodynamics, and I asked Scott, can I do something on that one? And Scott, he looked at me and he says like, yeah, all right, okay, let's try it. So we tried it, and it works. The fact that I was not classically trained as an aerodynamicist, it kind of helped. Very much like seeing it from a perspective that the classic aerodynamicist doesn't look at it. So, yeah, if you ask me how it works, I would say I'm just curious.
I think actually that was the ITV Tour de France coverage had little clips talking about the Secret Squirrel Club. I think it was either Rob Hales or Ed Clancy was like, it was really ideal to have someone who wasn't thinking inside the box and just seeing these extra things like, why aren't we trying this?
Yeah.
So was that properly like marginal gain stuff? Because when people talk about British cycling sort of evolution being marginal gains, is that like the hub of that?
It is. To give you an idea, we had a meeting, I think it was after 2004, 2005, something like this. And that's where we discussed the idea. I think Dave Brailsford coined the term of marginal gains, because around that time we thought that all the big things like aerodynamic helmets, skin suits, disc wheels and all that, they were already in existence. So all the big steps, they were already done. It was more of a matter of actually refining all those. So it was very much like, okay, if you add all this 0.5% here, 0.5% there, how far can it take you? And to give you an idea, I'm not going to mention names, but it was, I can't remember the exact year, but we put a world-class rider that he just raced in the Tour de France that year, and he won several stages and so on, in the wind tunnel with the kit as he raced in the Tour de France. And we start changing one thing after the other, the helmet, the skin suit, we put a skin suit on, an aero handlebar, an aero frame. Remember, this is 2010, and aero frames, especially for mass start events, they were not really that popular. So we changed this, we changed that, wheels, handlebars, frames, forks, closed helmets, skin suits, I can't remember whatever else. And we found a massive improvement by adding all these things together. The amount of improvement that we managed to find from the kit that this guy, he actually just about raced in the Tour de France. So we're talking about a top-level pro, not a club rider. The amount of improvement we had, it was a double-digit improvement. Wow. So it was not 1 or 2%. It was all reflected on the kit British Cycling used for 2012 for the mass start event. Okay, it didn't work out on the day. Vinokurov, I think he won it with a breakaway, and the strategy of the team, it was just go on the front and just hammer it. It didn't work. But the aero gains, they were very real. And as I said, they were just like double-digit improvement. Today, you wouldn't have that, because a lot of the things that we found at the time, skin suits, closed helmets, aero wheels and all that, is the standard today. But at the time, it was relatively new. And by putting all this kit together, you could have a significant improvement. There are still improvements that we can find today, but it's getting less and less and less.
Did you find yourself having someone from the kind of Greek cycling or the Greek government tapping you on the shoulder and being like, hang on, Dimitris, my friend, you were working for us in the 1990s and now suddenly you're helping this lot over here do some serious winning and make some serious advances?
No, never is the crazy answer. Although having said that, that's not exactly true. It was before the year 2000 when they asked me to do the frames for the 2000 Olympics for Sydney. And that was primarily because of the guy that he was the coach, because he was the same guy that he was my coach when I was in Greece, so he knew what I was doing. But then when that coach retired, all these years, no, never, anybody asked. If you can bloody believe it. But anyway, they haven't. And it's not that I never saw them ever since. I saw them, we had conversations and all this, but nothing ever happened. So, yeah, I don't know.
And were you guys aware of other national cycling organisations in different countries doing similar things? And did you ever feel like other people were watching you? You said that it was very important that you kept everything secret, even from Dave Brailsford, who's in charge of the program. And we know that in Formula One, for example, people spy on each other all the time. Did you have a sense that you were being watched or people might be leaking things at any point?
To my knowledge, at least, I don't think there was any leaking of information before we presented anything. Because at the end of the day, you do all these developments and you bring all your kit up in the Olympics and everybody can see it. Probably looking of what is happening out there, we're still probably ahead of most of them. Like, all these wide forks and wide seat stays, it is something that definitely came out of the British cycling development for 2020. And now in this year's Olympics, you have the Japanese bike, the French bike, and to some extent, the factor bike, the Aussies that will be racing in the Team Pursuit, that they have this wide fork and seat stay. I have to say, we were not the very first ones. Avanti, the New Zealand company, they had a similar arrangement before we did it. We believe our system is better. Actually, we tested and we know our system is better. I don't really know where we are comparing to the Japanese one or comparing to the Look bike. It's very difficult to know, but just looking at it, the Japanese bike, it looks like that they've done a lot of CFD. You see all the little winglets and all sorts of stuff on. The French bike, the Look bike, maybe I'm biased, but I don't know what should I say about that. Put it this way, I was hoping they're going to be a little bit more artistic. Maybe the aerodynamics work, I don't know. But I have to say, at least in the way it looks, like when we did the frame for Tokyo, we did try to make sure that the whole thing, it does look reasonably nice. So the rider goes to it and says, I have the best bike in the world and it looks cool and it looks good. And I have to say, with some of the bikes out there, you start losing this. I think the bike needs to be also aesthetically pleasing. Like you see, for argument's sake, a Pinarello or a Colnago, and you go, that's a beautiful bike. And I think the psychology of that is very, very important. You cannot take that away, I think.
Absolutely. You've got to want to ride it, to want to go fast and to win. But I find it striking, the difference between, say, Fillipo Ganna's kind of modified, it's based on a Pinarello Bolide, but it's a frame that you guys at Metron 3D printed from Skalmaloy. Yeah, Skalmaloy. Compare the shape of that bike, which is very, very narrow for anyone that hasn't seen it. It's classic kind of track looking bike. It's a very narrow machine with deep tubes, and compare that to the Hope bike, which Hope Lotus, which the guys are riding for Team GB, which has got these huge, great big gaps between the stays and the wheel. It couldn't look more different. How can there be such difference, and which one is the fastest type of design? Surely one has to be better than the other.
Yeah, I have to say, although I was involved in both, I don't know which one is the fastest, because I say number one thing that you have to do if you're working with multiple customers, you never really transfer technology from one to the other, because at the end of the day, the other guys are going to say, what the hell are you doing over here? We're paying you for this, and then you're just selling it to somebody else. So this is an absolute no, you cannot do it. But on the other hand, even if you forget that, when you're reaching this kind of level of performance, usually through research and development, you can make a good performing bike following a number of different avenues. On one side, you can do a very narrow bike, and in effect, you present the minimum turbulence in the airflow. So you try to pass the air over the bike as smoothly as possible with minimum interruption. Whereas on the other side, when you go onto something like these wide seat stays and forks and so on, it is well publicized, and this is the reason why all these other teams are doing it, is that you can use parts of the bike to affect the flow onto the rider. So the bike itself has higher drag. So if you put the bike in the wind tunnel, one and the other, the narrow bike and the wide one will have more drag as a bike. As the years are progressing and both systems are developing, there is a good chance that at some point, one or the other system, it might disappear. For the time being, both of them, they can work very well. Totally different philosophies. One of them is a very slippery bike, and the other one is not a very slippery bike, but you're making the rider more aero.
I just think that's fascinating. It just blows my mind.
I would be very interested to turn the clock forwards another 10 years and being able to see both technologies like push to the limits and really see where the balance lies. What is the final outcome? Because all these things are like you do some testing, and sometimes you may have that one technology may work with a certain type of rider on a certain type of event, and the other technology is going to work with a different type of rider and a different type of event. Because what you have in aerodynamics, you have something called the Reynolds number. The Reynolds number is very much like a non-dimensional number that it has to do, in effect, with a body, how it goes through a certain fluid. So you can have the same Reynolds number by going slower through water, for argument's sake, or faster through the air. And when you have, for argument's sake, two riders, one of them may be racing points race, it may be doing an average of, say, 55 kilometers an hour. And a rider, and maybe this rider may be 60 kilos, and then you have a rider which it is 100 kilos and is racing sprint and is doing 80 kilometers an hour. The size of the rider and the speed that you go, it will require different interventions to make the best result. So, for argument's sake, a 50 kilo female rider that she's racing points race, we will need totally different interventions comparing to a 100 kilo sprinter that races like sprinter is doing like 9.7 seconds on 200 meters. Because the speed and the size of the rider is vastly different. So you need significantly different interventions to make these guys go as fast as they can. So far, the main problem it is, at least on the bike front, you cannot really change much because if you stay with carbon fiber technology, you have to make a mold to make the component. Now that 3D printing becomes more and more common, we will be able to customize the bike to the rider. 3D printing should bring back this mass customization that my handlebar, my stem, my frame, saddles, as you know, they already 3D print saddles. And some companies, they do custom on this for your size, for your weight, for the type of event that you're racing. A saddle is a relatively small component, a relatively, you may call it inexpensive. Frame and fork and handlebars and all that stuff, they come in, put it this way.
At what point did you sort of see that 3D printing was going to be the next thing? And at what point did you decide, yeah, this is what I'm going to jump onto?
So we are actually 3D printing handlebars for top-level pros for the Tour de France and Olympic Games since 2015 was the first one for Bradley Wiggins, but we actually do it for the Tour de France and like Olympics since 2016. I have a long experience in composites. I thought there's no way you're going to be able to beat composites, carbon fiber on weight, because the material properties are actually significantly better. We're talking about not 5 or 10% better. We're talking about like double the strength and less weight. So in theory, you go like, there's no way you can beat that. There was a time there was some carbon fiber handlebars that we did for British cycling. And they came back and they said, can we make some more of those carbon fiber handlebars? And the composites company that we were using at the time, they didn't exist anymore. They closed down, and the company was sold. So I said, these guys that don't do it anymore, we can do it for you in 3D printing in titanium, but don't expect it to be lighter. In effect, I was telling them it will be heavier. So we sat down and we scratched our heads of how we can make it as light as possible. We made it, and that specific handlebar ended up about 5% lighter than the carbon fiber handlebar. And then I thought, maybe there is something in it. So then the more we were working on this, the more I realized that if you take it down the right design path, that you minimize nuts and bolts and connections, you only put the material that you really need over there, you could end up lighter. Like, to give you an idea on a handlebar which is for time trial, the base bar, any risers, extensions, arm pads, and computer arm, and so on, usually these things are over 1 kilo. We made more than 100 of those. And they were all from a maximum weight of about 750 grams or thereabouts, all the way down to about 570. Complete bar with risers, arm pads, extensions, and computer arm. We did something very similar recently. So there will be some parts that will be racing in the Olympics, that the fork is 3D printed. And that fork, if you were designing it in carbon fiber, the carbon fiber fork, it will be probably 10 or 20 grams lighter than the 3D printed version. If you move on to the frame, currently, the main thing over there is not that you're going to try and pick the weight. The main thing is that when it's going to be developed well enough, you will be able to make any size you want, with any special features for any rider, for any event. So you would say, I want a frame that is going to have these aerodynamic features. This is actually another bit, because with carbon fiber, you can only do so much on the shape. And not only you can do so much with the shape, you develop it, you make it, and if it is not quite there, because you have to make a mold, then you start with it. That's why usually the cycle time from one model to the other is actually a few years, because making a mold is expensive and time consuming. But with the 3D printing, you make it. If you want extra features, if you want modifications, if you want to try something, that is the way to go.
Do you feel like we'll see this on the road? Because at the moment, so much of this is centered on the track, where arguably weight is a secondary consideration over aerodynamics, because you're not going uphill, basically. You're not counteracting gravity. Do you think that this technology, 3D printing, additive manufacture, will eventually replace carbon fiber in the pro peloton?
I think replacing it is a bit of a difficult one to say. Mm-hmm. I don't think it will replace it completely, at least not in the next 5 years. Okay, 10 years, who knows? Okay, in the next 5 years, my prediction, based on what I know and based on the work that we keep doing in the background, it will definitely bring some benefits that it will make people consider it. Like if I go back in 2015, actually 2013, 2014, I was trying to convince people to 3D print something in titanium. They were saying, why do we want to do it? Nobody else is doing it. Carbon fiber is lighter. We can do what we want to do with carbon fiber. Why do we need it? 2015, we made the handlebar for Bradley Wiggins for the hour record. And they were like, oh, right, okay, there is something in it. And then you saw all these things that you saw with the 3D printing handlebars, things that there was on Ganna's bike with the risers that had this squiggly shape and so on. So it's not that you're replacing carbon fiber because it's lighter, but you replace a carbon fiber because the technology gives you this very quick turnaround time. So it's not going to replace it in a like-for-like technology. It's going to replace it because you can do extra things with 3D printing.
Who pays for all this stuff? Because I think I've seen articles on Fillipo Ganna's Pinarello collaboration bike that totaled about €75,000 for his setup, and that's just the bicycle. That's not the other things that probably he didn't end up using that were made for him. I think we have seen Wiggins's bars estimated at around £20,000 for his handlebars. I mean, you're laughing.
Yeah, don't
I
believe
don't know
everything you hear.
But then if you look at Hope's website for the Hope Lotus bike, 25 grand. You want to buy one of those? It's 25 grand for the frame. You want to buy those wheels? They're £4,000 each. So that's an awful lot of money. Where is that money coming from? Is Fausto Pinarello paying for Ganna's bike because it's an amazing billboard, or is it all coming out of the teams or national government?
All these things. I mean, if you look back in history, pretty much all major developments, they started from national teams. So today we have aero helmets, skin suits, disc wheels or 3-spoke wheels and stuff like this. I can't quite remember when was the first time that somebody used this aero helmet. I think there was a guy from East Germany or Czechoslovakia or something like this in the 70s, because somebody took a rider and they put them in the wind tunnel and they said, put this thing on your head. Oh, that drops the drag. So, and every time there is Olympic Games, I mean, if you look back, Moscow Olympics, I think it was the first time that the riders, they used skin suits. I may be wrong on that, but it was around that time. 1984, you had Los Angeles Olympics, and the Americans, they came up with aero helmets, skin suits, bikes with small wheels and all that stuff. So every time there is Olympics, and especially if the host nation spends a bit of money in cycling, the technology is progressing. A lot of the things that we know today is actually coming from national teams doing efforts for the Olympics. And to be fair, primarily because of what the Americans, they did for 84 and 96. And then what we did later on with British cycling for 2012. So you have to have the big budget for somebody to spend to do all this testing and put all these clever people together to come up with the ideas. And then the technology will be democratized, if I can say, which is more or less what is happening with more or less any technology. It starts from racing, like disc brakes. They were on Formula One. Any engine developments, again, primarily Formula One. So then a few years later, you have the everyday people. And I say the everyday people. We did a number of handlebars for British cycling in the past. We did quite a few for Team Sky or Ineos, as they call it today. Then so far, I think, if I remember correctly, we had 3 private individuals that they got the same treatment, and we made custom time trial bars for them. And in effect, these guys, they benefiting from know-how that we developed for national teams. It wasn't the same thing because we cannot go on to do exactly the same thing. But the overall level of knowledge, it comes from what's happening with national teams. And you cannot go away from that. You have to have somebody who has the deep pocket to push the technology forwards.
Are those guys like really rich blokes that work in finance that love cycling? Or are you talking about professional cyclists, someone like Pogacar's come to you privately and said, actually, I'd like to buy something from you because my team won't provide it?
No, they were private individuals. I don't quite know what was their personal background, but at least one of these guys, I'm not quite sure what job he was doing, but we had to do with this guy like stage payments. So it was whatever it was the amount of money, because he was not only he was riding onto a bike that we never actually did anything before. So we actually had to do a lot of development just for him. And to make that happen, I think we were in contact with this guy for about a year or so. So he came, we gave him a quotation, he gave us a bit of money, we started the job, and as the payments they were coming in, we were just doing the job till we actually delivered it. So I don't really know. I definitely they were not multimillionaires. They were just like good level amateurs that they wanted to have the best they can.
And how much you've spoken about working in the Tour de France? Was that limited to Sky and Ineos, or have you carried on or with other teams?
We have our clients. Let's put it this way. We have our clients, but it did start with Sky for sure. But over the years, these things they're coming and going. It's not that because you've done something for somebody in the past, that's it. Like there were several components we've done in the past that nobody knows really. So you see riders riding it and nobody spotted that there was any different because it's usually painted over with the sponsors' logos and it looks very similar to the sponsors' parts. And we were covering a special need with regarding the size of the part or whatever special requirement they had at the time.
So if someone was watching and looking at all these vast articles of galleries online of Tour de France time trial bikes, and they see aero bars on someone like Tadej Pogačar that are just completely black but with a Richard Mille thing, they look maybe that's from you?
No, we didn't do anything for Pogačar. So, to be fair, our biggest market recently, in fact, not only recently, but over the years, it was the track. So in these upcoming events, next week on the track in Paris, there will be a number of parts that we've done for customers. They're going to be all blanked out, and they will be covered with the sponsors' logos. And sorry, but I cannot tell you who these guys are. But there will be quite a large number of our Mythos bar that is identified as Mythos, because we had this bar that we came up with that is going to be used primarily on events like Omnium and Points Race and these kind of things. And that proved to be very popular. Actually, there's a bit of a backstory in this one. I always had this idea in my head on how could you potentially put the rider on a bike with a normal drop bar, but go as close as possible to the time trial bar position within the regulations and safely. So it was less than 2 years ago. It was actually November or something like this, 2022, that we were not very busy, so we started working on that. And then early 23, we had this bar out. And then a lot of riders around the world, they found this to be very useful. So we sold quite a lot of these bars, actually. In some events on these must start events on the track, not far from half the riders that will have our bars. And it is because it has those, you have the normal drop bar and it has those, bits that are sticking in that you can grab with both hands. And it has like an area that you can rest on. And it fits really well around your forearm. So it can actually keep you in a good position, in full control of the bike, because there's just like a good grip. And the whole bar is left in the rough state as it comes out of the machine, which it gives you a natural anti-slip surface. So because you see, if you actually paint it, it's usually slippery, whereas we just specifically leave the bar as it comes out of the machine. So it is actually, it gives you like a proper grip. It can rest against your skin and you don't slip. So again, that was not that titanium is a better material. It was purely the manufacturing process. It can do all these very complicated shapes. And through feedback with the riders, we actually managed to modify it and develop it to what the riders they want, because we made the prototypes, give them out. We had some feedback from some top-level riders that they were already world champions. And then we modify those. And then in the Glasgow World Championship last year, We had in total 10 medals, I think 4 gold, 4 silver, and 2 bronze. Not all of them visible because some of them they were like with customers that they had their own brand on. But that was like primarily on this new handlebar because it was so popular. And it was mainly the feedback from these riders that developed this to the extent that we could actually react very quickly. We give a component out. They say, if you make this a bit smaller, make that a bit higher, that a bit lower, and so on, it will be best. We do the modifications in a day. We put in the machine. A couple of days later, it's out of the machine. We're cleaning it, we're bonding it and all that, ship it out. And a week or 2 later, the rider is with a new handlebar in the position that they just dreamt just a few days ago. And it is this very quick turnaround, which is the main benefit of the process, is not so much the material or anything like this.
So all these different people, you're doing all this stuff, but you obviously you can't share that knowledge that they paid for with someone else. How often are you working with someone and they're saying something, do you feel like you can't be like, oh no, don't do that, I know it doesn't work? Or how often then are you looking at the wider sort of peloton or track racing and seeing people you haven't worked with and just being like, what are they doing?
There are some of them that you look at them and you go like, oh, you shouldn't be doing it like this. Because we know it doesn't work and we know it is as actually a detriment rather than a benefit. But, you can only do so much, if you want something better, come and we can do it. But again, as I said, there are plenty of good ideas out there. The way you need to look at this, something like this, every time the regulation changes, that gives you an opportunity to do something different. It's the same thing with Formula One. They change the regulations every few years to an extent in Formula One to some team it takes like the advantage and they're going to be like a little bit too far off from everybody else. And nobody wants to keep looking on and going on the race and knowing, it's going to be the same guy who's going to win it. So by changing the regulations to an extent, you leveling the play field again until hopefully somebody else will find something better. And then it will make it exciting also for the people to watch it. So, yeah, we always look at what other people do.
So what do you think about differential height wheel rims? So Zip with their 454s, Princeton Carbon Works. So you've got the wavy rim profile. Good or bad?
This is my patent.
That's your patent? Okay, so I'm going to say you're going to say it's a good one then.
Of course a good one.
Well, that's interesting because Princeton were sued by Zip for a bit for ripping off their patent or their shape. So did you have a conversation with Zip when you went, guys, hang on a second?
Yeah. No. What it is I don't want to go into the legality because at the end of the day, there was a court case. There was a court case, rightly or wrongly, we lost the court case. If I remember correctly, I may not remember the exact words, but the patent office, they were agreeing that what we had, it was correct and what Princeton was doing was not. But somehow the court, the jury decided that was not the case. So you had from one side the patent office and the experts saying that we were right, and then you had the jury saying the other guys that were right. But I don't want to go into that. At the end of the day, it's a court case that happened. It's in the past. I'm not too happy about it, but it is what it is.
But they are very fast wheels.
Of course, it was my idea.
And how about something that maybe this was your idea too, but I remember the Ridley Noah Fast bike, and that came out and it had channels in the fork, so it had quite wide fork legs with 2 slits, and the idea I think was to allow airflow to reduce the pressure build up between the wheel and the inside of the fork legs. And then it also had those trip strips, so little rough edges that again were designed to kind of create turbulence to then help is complete bullshit, or did it work?
Okay, putting trips or rough surfaces and so on to trip the airflow and reduce the overall drag, is definitely a technology that works. Okay, so no question about this. These tubercles that you see on the Pinarello bike, which we also had on the seat posts for British cycling in the Tokyo Olympics, which nobody spotted. So this is a technology that both technologies, they do work in terms of at the speeds the bike is going, and in general, the kind of shapes of aerofoils and so on you have on a bike. Turbulent airflow will actually give you a lower overall drag. It will have higher skin friction, so as the airflow goes over the body, it will have more friction. But then as the airflow tries to detach, if you have turbulent airflow, it will go around the body more. Okay. And it will have a smaller, low pressure area behind it, and that will give you overall less drag. So trips and turbulators and rough surfaces and so on, in general, they work. These twin blades and slits and so on, do they work? I think this is an opinion rather than a fact-based one, because I never really put that bike in the wind tunnel, so I cannot really tell. But my opinion is the particular intervention with these dual blades and so on, my opinion is it was not working. And the fact of the matter that this solution disappeared, it probably tells us it never worked. Because if it is a successful solution and it does give an improvement, of course they're going to keep it.
So in which case, so many people just say that all bicycles look the same now. So I'm thinking back to the road. So you've got the dropped seat stays, you've got compact geometry, and you've got truncated tube profiles. So the tube profiles are quite deep, but they're kind of squared off the back, which helps compliance. So you don't have a really stiff frame, but also
it's not for compliance.
Saves weight and helps with mass.
No. What it is, I'm kind of do sketches on the aero or something like this. If you have an aerofoil, normal old type aerofoils, you will see in old bikes, you have the aerofoil that goes onto a pointy edge in the back, or very close to a pointy edge.
Like an aeroplane wing.
Yeah. An aeroplane wing has what they call an aspect ratio, meaning the thickness of the aerofoil and the length of something about 6, 7, 8, 10 to 1. So if it is 10 centimeters long, it will be 1 centimeter high, there or thereabouts, or 1 centimeter high and 8 centimeters long, or something like this. So for a long time, it was not allowed to have aerofoils with an aspect ratio more than 3 to 1. Yeah, that rule is being removed the last, 4 or 5 years. I don't remember, whatever it is. Now, because when you had these short, fat aerofoils, the best shape is not one with a pointy edge, because what it is as the airflow goes around, you separate it with the front end of the aerofoil, and then the air is trying to close it back again towards the pointy edge. But an aerofoil that it was 3 to 1, you couldn't really close the air fast enough, so it was actually detaching not too far from the highest point of the aerofoil, maybe not on the highest point, but not too far from behind it. So it was creating a relatively relatively large area with low pressure behind. So that is called form drag. So in effect, it's a low pressure area behind the body. So then, again, this is not new technology. I found books from the 1950s and even before mentioning this, that if you have a truncated aerofoil, on head-on, you don't have lower drag. You actually have a slightly higher drag. But when the wind comes from the side, you're creating a bit of lift, actually quite a lot of lift. And some of that, especially as the angle comes higher, some of that is translated on forwards force, which actually drops your overall drag, pulls you forwards. So the truncated aerofoils, they're for two reasons. One is they work very well on the road because the wind comes from more or less any direction. And this way you have a better overall performance. It's not going to be better on head-on, but you hardly ever have the wind hitting you head-on. The wind always comes from some direction. So one is that, and the other one is when you have a bike and you have water bottles on. If you look old aerodynamic bikes, they had a nice aerofoil section on the down tube, and then you were sticking a big bottle behind it. But then when you, on the normal everyday race, like on the Tour de France, on the stages and so on, you're not going to have anything else other than a round bottle, because it's much easier to change bottles as you're going along and all that. All these aero bottles, they're terrible to hold and so on. So you have to have a round bottle. And the best way to shield, if I can say, this aero bottle and make it more aerodynamic is to have a wide tube that it covers partially that bottle. So the frame itself will be more draggy, but by the time you put the water bottle on, it will be less as a total unit.
Yeah.
And in the vast majority of cases, anything, unless if you go out for a 10-mile ride, in pretty much any other case, you are carrying a water bottle or two. And the position of the bottle is very important. So you can look on the well-developed frames what they do, and you can see that both bottles are as low as they can be and as close to each other as they can be. And just for something that I just want to, just as a very easy thing, let's say you have 2 bottle cages on your bike and you want to use only one, use the one on the down tube, not the one on the seat tube. Because if you put on the seat tube, you will have significantly higher drag comparing on the down tube. And this is irrespective of what kind of bike you have.
Very good. Well, I've absolutely been corrected on truncated tubes. However, I still maintain that lots of bikes look the same. They have truncated tubes, they have drop seat stays, they follow a very similar silhouette. If you look at the Colnago V4 RS or V, I can't remember which Pogacar raced on, that looks very similar to a Specialized tarmac. Is the reason those bikes look similar because we have now converged on what we might say is just the fastest shape that also compromises with rigidity and comfort? Or is it because the industry is just doing things, it's trying to manufacture bicycles to sell to people, not just for racers? So it's effectively doing it in a kind of cost-effective manner. That's an easy shape to make compared to something like Fillipo Ganna's Bolide, which had all of these crazy dimpled effects and wavy tubes and everything else.
It's a bit of both. If you have, they all have to race under the same rules and regulations. So you have the UCI governing the size and the shape of the tubes. So you cannot go more than 8 centimeters, you cannot go less than 1 centimeter, and you have to have this triangular frame within boxes and so on. So this is one set of rules. And then on the other side, you have the rules of physics. So no matter which way you're going to look at it, by the time you apply the same physics in the same set of regulations, you will end up with more or less the same result. That's why you see this thing of down tube is primarily a truncated aerofoil, low seat stays, because in effect, if you have the seat stays high up, forget the wide seat stays. The wide seat stays work in a different way. But in normal seat stays, if you have something which hits the airflow like that, it will have whatever drag it will have. You tilt it 45 degrees, and the drag of that exact same element is not half, but it's not far from half. So by tilting them forwards, the exact seat stays, you're lowering the drag. And because they are shorter, you're lowering the weight, and you have almost no penalty for this. So you're using the same physics in the same kind of regulatory environment, so you're getting more or less the same result. Now, the manufacturers, they're making thousands of bikes. Of course, they have to have a bike that is easy to manufacture. So this is partly also why you see, if you look on all these tubes and so on, they usually have some, you have the truncated, you have the aerofoil section, and then when it goes on the flat back, it has a nice rounded edge. In terms of aerodynamic, aerodynamics, if you have a proper sharp edge, it's going to be better. But it's difficult to manufacture. So pretty much everybody found that if you have a sharp edge, it's more aero. But then when you have to make thousands of those, this is a problem. So this is why pretty much everybody converged back onto a slightly rounded edge, because this way you can manufacture it successfully, the weight is reasonable, and you don't have very high reject rate. So I think bikes, they can change if the UCI changes the regulations, like they removed the 3-to-1, which that changed the bikes a little bit. Then they removed, there was a minimum of 25 millimeters on the 3 main tubes. That is being removed, and you have a minimum of 10. So anything between 80 and 10 millimeters in any direction, we can have it. That had a very small effect, not a very huge one. So for argument's sake, if the obligatory, if I can say, triangle, double diamond shape is going to be removed, we're going to probably see some new shapes and so on, as you see sometimes in triathlon. Is it better or is it a marketing gimmick? That can be debatable. Again, you have the manufacturing technology restrictions, like what can you do with carbon fiber? This is what I was saying, that 3D printing can come in and do different things. And if you were asking me today what these different things they would be, I would say in the near future, they will probably be directed towards aerodynamics rather than weight saving. And later on, God knows, human beings, they have a rather large capacity for imagination. So hopefully we're going to find something to do with that that's going to be better.
So you started working on bikes in the 90s and we obviously spoke about what they look like today. And then the Tour de France this year, you're seeing the best riders, mainly Pogacar, obviously breaking records that have stood since the 90s. Obviously, the conditions were slightly different in terms of what was in their bodies and all that stuff as well. And it's mainly on the climbs. So there is going to be like the way of carbon fiber. But how much difference has there been in the bike? So obviously, they're going so fast that the aero is going to make a difference as well. Is what the growth has been in the bike since the 90s to now, how much does that validate the increase of performance level?
I don't think it's only the bike. It definitely helps regarding the bike, because like in the 90s, Pantani and so on, they were racing with pretty light bikes. They were very close to the 6.8 weight limit. I don't think in the 90s there was a weight limit, but the bikes, they were there or thereabouts. They didn't have deep aero wheels. They had maybe 28 spokes or whatever they had at the time. Not really deep aero rims. It was primarily lightweight. Definitely also the bikes of the 90s, they were not as stiff. They were light, but they were not as stiff and light as they are today. So in terms of technology on the bike, you have to think about it, Pogacar and people like this, they going up the mountain about as fast as I go down the mountain. So aero is a lot more important for them because they're going up the mountain at 30 or 40 kilometers an hour. Maybe not 40, but they do go up pretty fast. So when you're going in this kind of speeds, the aero does matter. I remember we had this meeting with Team Sky guys 10 years ago. About him, maybe more. I cannot quite remember exactly when it was. And it was the time that everybody was trying to make a lightweight bike. And I remember this situation. There was this specific rider who was trying to win the Giro. And he had a hobby, if I can say, of trying to make the bike as light as possible. So his bike was ending up below the 6.8 weight limit. And they had to put weights on lead and all that stuff to bring it to the limit. So I said, like, what are you doing? No, you're making it as light as possible. You're putting sensitive components. You pay no attention to aerodynamics. And then you ending up putting dead weight that does nothing. They had to put up to roughly 400 grams of dead weight. Why don't you use that weight to have aero wheels, for argument's sake? You know that the aero wheels, they will be faster. Even if they are not faster going up the mountain, they will require less of energy expenditure from the rider on the flat before you reach the mountain. So you reach the mountain and you're a little bit fresher. And when you're going up the mountain, you will have like a bit of lesser resistance. I go like, yeah, that makes sense. So this is why, I don't say this is just because of me, but this is like, there was the transition of actually, we need to make everything as light as possible and then put dead weight. And they were racing with these wheels, they were like about, 25 millimeter tip rims. And they found that if they put 50 millimeter tip rims, the overall weight is more or less the same, but you have the extra aero benefit. So you're using this weight to do something with it rather than just carry it up the mountain. So in terms of technology, the bikes today, they are definitely more aero. In the 90s, aero was almost unknown. Everybody had round tubes and so on. And the rims, they were just pretty much flat back rims. So aero, stiffer. We should not forget that there is a lot of extra know-how since the 90s on the training and the way they do all these keto diets and all that stuff.
Looking back on your career, what was that breakthrough moment, or what were those breakthrough moments where you think, where at the end of my life, I want to be remembered for making the world's fastest aero socks or getting the patent on the wavy rim profile? What has been that like eureka moment for you?
Definitely for me, when I discovered carbon fiber and what you can do with that, it was a definite big moment because then you can start doing shapes and so on that you couldn't do before. Then there was another one regarding aerodynamics. I had a vague idea about aerodynamics, but through the development with British Cycling, I was lucky enough to sit down with some of the cleverest people ever regarding aerodynamics. And I learned a massive amount. And I also learned that you can do a lot with the performance of the rider and aerodynamics. So carbon fiber, aerodynamics, the wavy wheel is just one of the patents. Actually, I applied for quite a few other ones, and some of them, they're still out there. But the wavy rim is the only one that makes me a little bit of money. 3D printing definitely opens up a new door. What else it will be in 5 or 10 years' times, I don't know. For me, it goes almost in 20-year cycles. Around 91, 92, I realized that something is happening with carbon fiber. And around 2012, I realized something is happening with 3D printing. So we have to wait till another 10 years. Put it this way, I'm not thinking of giving up anytime soon. There was, at some point, I started writing a book about it, about what I've done and all that. And I stopped it because I felt like, God, no, I don't want to write my book of my life.
You've got more stuff to do.
I have a lot more stuff to do. And like, I'll write it when I'm going to be 100. I promise you, when I'm going to be 100, I will retire.
You heard it here first. Well, in which case, look at it a slightly different way. If we open we won't call it a museum because you're still working, we'll call it a gallery. What objects are in the gallery that you are most proud of that sum you up? Which bicycle or components are in there which you go, yep, that was the zenith of my understanding about aerodynamics, or that was the thing that I managed to make having understood composite manufacture for the first time? It changed the game.
I wouldn't call it the zenith. I would say what actually changed the game. Mm-hmm. 92, I did my first full carbon fiber handlebar. There's a bit of a long story about it with candlesticks and sonars and so on, but I'm not going to go into that now.
Go on. You've said that now. Candlesticks and sonar?
There was 1992. I thought like, okay, I'll make a bike out of carbon fiber. How am I going to do it? So I took some balsa wood that was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 millimeter thick. and I covered it in carbon. I took a normal handlebar, I chopped off the handles and I put it on and I just wrap it in carbon. But it was very, very thin, so it was very flexible. So then I took two more and I took it from the grips down to where you normally have a brake. That was a track bike, so it didn't have a front brake. So it had this triangulation, so it had a horizontal bit and two bits that were coming down to the foreground. And it was the early days of going on the extensions, if I can call it like this. How am I going to make this? So I thought I wanted something that's going to go from the grips and up to the shape that you're holding like this. So how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? So I found a really long candlestick that was like about 1 meter long. And it was a little bit tapered, so I actually saved it to be all more or less the same diameter. And I used my mother's hairdryer to heat it up and bend it into the shape. So I put it on the bar, and I asked the rider to go on and move it around to where he wanted it to be. Higher, lower, further forwards, and all that. At the time, there were no regulations of where this needs to be. So he said, that's where I want it. So he left it there. We left it in a cool room so the thing actually cooled down to the shape that we wanted. Then I wrap it in carbon and epoxy. But wax is heavy, and it was like a lot of wax in there. So how am I going to get it out? And in the sports complex over there where the cycling track was, they had a sauna. So I put a tray in and the handlebar on. So the sauna temperature melted the wax and it all came out. And that's how I made my first carbon fiber handlebar. With candle wax and stuff like that. So that is definitely a moment. Another one, it will be the monocoque frames that I was making in the mid-90s. And my last customer on this was actually British Cycling. If you look on the internet somewhere, there is a picture of Chris Hoy riding one of my monocoque Metron frames. If you put Chris Hoy on Metron or something like this, you will see this on his Twitter account. And definitely these monocoque frames, I absolutely loved those. There's a story behind that. I was a first-year engineering student, so I had a disused door in my room, and I put on some parcel paper, not this brown parcel paper. I didn't have fancy white paper and so on. So I was designing a frame in real size. So I said, front wheel here, rear wheel there, bottom bracket here, saddle here. How am I going to do it? Let's make a bike, which I was trying to see, how can you make a bike similar to the Mike Barrow's bike, the Lotus bike. So I made like a beam bike from the head tube to the rear wheel and from the bottom bracket going up to the saddle. And I had all straight lines. Engineering, straight lines, it was most effective. My landlady, Terry, bless her, she comes in with a cigar and goes, what is that? I say, it's a bike. Oh, all right, okay. I say, it's very straight. If you make it a bit curvy, it will be nicer. Well, I think she's right. So I made it. It had these nice, gentle curves and so on. And people absolutely loved it. I sold it to 11 national teams later.
Wow.
And so definitely that. Then after that, definitely the UKSI bike, especially the Mark I, the one that raced in Athens in 2004, actually first raced in 2002. That one, ignorance is bliss. British Cycling came and said, can you do that? I said, yeah, of course I can do this. Till that time, I never used 3D CAD. Everything was like on paper. So I went on and I bought one of these 3D CAD software. And I've done tutorial number 1, tutorial number 2, and off I went to design the bike for the Olympics. And look, I can tell you, if I knew what I know now, how difficult it would be, I probably wouldn't do it. So ignorance is actually, naivety is great because you don't know how difficult it is. You just go head on, I'll do it. And I was actually working a proper job at the time. So I was working evenings and weekends. And I actually managed to deliver the bike from the World Go. I had the Go Christmas 2001. So I started in January 2002. And by May, I think it was, I delivered the first frame. There was an old episode of Tomorrow's World on the BBC. They filmed it and all that. And I delivered the first frame. It was just frame, it was not frame and fork. Chris Coy, they assembled the bike with all the same parts that they had before at British Cycling, same wheels, handlebars and everything. And Chris Coy goes in and he does a flying 200 and he broke his own record by 1/4 of a second.
Wow.
1/4 of a second, you may say, well, that's not very much. These riders, they going 20 meters a second. 1/4 of a second, he was 5 meters ahead of his previous time. So that was definitely a moment of like, wow, we may have something good in our hands.
Yeah.
And then the next one, it would be something has to do with the 3D printing. You may say Bradley's handlebar. You may say the frame, or I don't know. This is the 3D printing is still on early chapters of that book. We are still on early chapters of that book, and I don't know what the highlight of this will be. It could be that we already reached the high point, but I think we are nowhere near the high point because it's still relatively new. So, handlebar made out of candlesticks, carbon fiber monocoque frame, then British Cycling frame. Naivety is great because if you don't know how difficult the task is, you just go on and do it. And actually works. If you put the effort in, it works.
Well, you've got decades and decades left before you have to retire at 100. Dimitris Katsanis, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a real privilege to talk to you, really interesting. And I know for sure we could have done this for about another 3 hours quite easily. Best of luck with everything you're doing over at Metron. And yeah, for everyone out there, keep an eye on your tellies. You've got loads of people, 4 different national teams, I think. And they're just the registered ones who are using your components at Paris Games at the moment. So keep your eagle eyes peeled.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Dimitris Katsanis, ladies and gentlemen. My mind is slightly frazzled after having that conversation. A lot of it does genuinely go beyond me, especially when someone starts talking about turbulent airflow and how you can sort of create lift, which is a bit like forward momentum by having a certain shape in a frame. So it's a bit like a sail, but then it's not a sail, it's a bike frame. I don't know how it works. Anyway, Will, very interesting. It'll be one of those episodes.
Could have gone all day.
Could have gone on all day. And we nearly did. So I'd love to have Dimitris back on the show. But the thing that always sticks out to me with a gentleman like him, or anyone in the sport, is I love that story of, I just basically started doing a bit of this in my garage.
Yeah, but most of the time it's like, okay, fine, you're already in that path. But for him, it sounded really like you've become a genius. You've read these books. You've done these degrees. You'd have thought that would start at like the university thing, whereas a lot of like the garage things, they're already like certified genius at that point, right? Like the Silicon Valley stuff.
Exactly. It has that sort of feeling where you probably go to uni and you learn some stuff and it consolidates some wisdom, but realistically it's a bit like you're this kind of impossible force, in as much as like impossible to slow down. You were always going to get there because you can almost see something that other people can't. You can ask questions that perhaps other people can't, and somehow you can either find the answers yourself or find people around you to get those answers. And I love the idea that he doesn't really know anything about aerodynamics, but he's read loads and loads of books on it and kind of made himself a bit of an expert, which, is just totally brilliant. And I feel like you only get stories like that, well, not only in bikes, but often you get them in bikes.
I think with people that work at the wind tunnel, like say the people that work at Silverstone Wind Tunnel, they obviously, like he said, they can't share their info with their different clients. If someone at Silverstone retires, and just been like, okay, this is everything that I have learned. Because at some point, they're surely holding back some development.
Yeah.
Like combining knowledge bases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this reminds me of an Instagram post that I saw the other day. The difference between like a scientist working back in like the 30s and how they worked for a massive institution and uncovered knowledge that then became a heavily guarded secret. And the person working today, and they made money off it potentially. Whereas the person working today goes to uni, does a PhD, does incredible amounts of research, puts himself in an absolute hole of debt, and at the end of it, you can find all that information on the internet anyway.
That is the age that we live in.
That is the age. Did you feel like that about your university career, that you could have just looked it up on the internet?
Partially, but I did a history degree, so I mean, it almost definitely could have been on the internet, but it depends if the book's on the internet, right? And there was a lot of required reading that wasn't required enough for me to read it. Still get through.
Fiendish.
It was, yeah. But I'm here, so it did exactly what it was required to do.
It's true. And indirectly, it put you in the hot seat opposite me, and it made you incredibly knowledgeable about bikes. And I'm also told it's made you incredibly knowledgeable about how to pronounce rider names, which, as you may have heard me struggle with Dimitris's name. I'm sorry, Dimitris. It's not always easy. Finucan, that's one. Finucan,
I think. But so if anyone listening doesn't know, on the Olympics website, all the athletes have provided like a recording of them saying their name, so you know how to pronounce it. Probably mostly for commentators who still pronounce it wrong. Chris Boardman is a particular one in this example I'm about to share, if you haven't already heard it. But for example, you can hear like Andy Murray's "He's Trying Hard Not to Laugh," which is good value. But the best one, if you haven't heard it, is double Olympic champion Belgian cyclist. He's quite good. Let me hope I have my volume on.
Go Evenepoel. Go Evenepoel.
So now you know.
Evenepoel. I think I could probably say that almost already.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful.
Blows my mind. It's lovely to have a steer on that. And then, of course, with cycling, you also have to then throw in the place names. That's really difficult too. I still don't know how to say Chimmy Le Bonnet. I don't think it's Chimmy. I think it might be Chime. I think in Italian it's Jimmy. Who knows? Seam. I think it is Seam, isn't it? There you go. Because it's like, do you ever read a book? I mean, if you've got this far in this show, then well done to you. So we're just going to go off on one now possibly and then go home. But do you ever do that thing where you're reading a book and you can't pronounce the characters' names?
Yeah, and it just really puts a dampener on the experience, I think.
Just never got it. If you're an author, I'm not saying you have like incredibly dull names, but you have names, and this is, and obviously, and I appreciate that like loads of books, you know, it's international market, loads of books are translated, so of course there are books where they're relatively normal, you know, normal names, interesting names in a native tongue, but to me they're not. So obviously, but there are also books which just have really finicky names in them, which
Game of Thrones,
exactly. Which, I mean, Brienne of Tarth, what a name. But it's just one of those things that detracts from the enjoyment of the book, because I start looking at the names almost like kind of symbols, like objects.
You just skip over the voice in your head.
Yeah. I just go, said mate. Like when you can't remember someone's name when you've met them in the street.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe well, actually, no, to be fair, you do actually hear Sean Kelly synonymizing, if that's a word. He's clearly forgotten the person's name or won't commit to it, and he basically says the rider or the guy. I'm surprised I haven't heard him say your man, but
your man. Oh yeah, of course, your man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we listen out, I mean, what's up next? Tour de France femme again. Femme. It's femme. It's not femme. It's
won't
femme.
be Sean Kelly for the Tour de France femme.
No, it won't. But he might be doing the Vuelta.
Vuelta, yeah.
Again, the Vuelta.
Yeah, I don't know how a Spanish person would. Probably, well, they have their well, obviously there's different accents within the Spanish dialect.
Very astute of you.
Yeah, the V and B are quite similar, which could change that pronunciation.
Well, I mean, we'll have to find out in the fullness of time. Vuelta. So, who knows? But for now, all I know is it's been a very long day already. It's probably time to go. It has been very fun though. And I'm going to go away and try and aero optimize my bike by moving the bottle from the seat tube to the down tube. Don't do the other way around. That makes
just get rid of the bottle.
Just get rid of the bottle altogether.
Hydration pack.
I'll see you next week, Will. Toodaloo.
Bye.